Namaskar. Welcome back to the Bhagavad Gita online classes. We have a special treat for Mumbaikars. Experience the power of collective satsang at the in person talks on Bhagavad Gita for a Successful Mindset by Jaya Rao. 16th to 19th October, daily 6:30 to 8 pm. Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan Auditorium, Chowpatty, Mumbai 400007. Invite your loved ones in Mumbai to these talks. Your one message or call could become the game changer in the lives of many. To stay updated on the talks in Mumbai, join Jayaji's WhatsApp community. Visit vedantavision.org/WhatsApp or click the link in the description. I now request Jayaji to continue with chapter 1.
सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति.
Yeah.
In the last class, you had mentioned that if you're not happy as you are where you are, you'll never be happy. A follow-up question to that is, does a happy person also get angry?
It's unrelated to the earlier statement, but the question is, does a happy person also get angry? What is the answer to that? Yes, because what is anger? If you understand that, then you'll get your answer. What is anger?
Unfulfilled desire.
When a desire, that means thought flow, is going from you to a particular object or being, and that thought flow gets obstructed. Somebody comes in the way. Let's say you want a particular contract in business, and a competitor comes and gets the contract. So your thought flow that's going towards the contract gets deflected towards the competitor as anger. So you may otherwise be a happy person, generally happy person, but if a particular desire gets obstructed, you will get angry. Now, how you deal with the anger is a different matter. If you have a strong intellect, you understand where that anger is coming from and you control it. You don't allow it to manifest in an ungainly manner. But most of us don't have that intellectual control, so we just explode. But yes, what follows is a generally happy person has less desires. You know that equation, happiness equals number of desires fulfilled divided by number of desires harbored. So because your denominator is generally lower, chances of your getting angry will be less. Good question. Any other?
How do you deal with desires which are already been cultivated?
How do you deal with desires?
Which have already been cultivated.
All desires are cultivated, no? How do you deal with desires? Firstly, scan the desire with your intellect. So ask yourself whether it is a reasonable desire, whether you have the wherewithal to fulfill that desire, the resources, whether it is in line with your life's purpose, goal. And if the answer to all these questions is yes, by all means, go ahead and fulfill that desire. But if the answer is no, let's say, for instance, you want a private jet and you don't even have a luxury car, it's not going to be fulfilled. So you cut it right there.
That is if you have a very strong intellect. But at times I find myself in a position wherein, the intellect tries and reason it out to what the desire wants. I mean, what the mind wants. How do you deal with that situation?
Yes. You're giving the example of having a poor intellect or weak intellect, and it justifies what the mind desires. So then you have to consult a wiser person, a person with a clearer head, clearer thinking. Okay? Especially in important matters. If it's an unimportant matter like which shirt to buy, it doesn't matter. But important things, you would do well to consult someone. You see, in the past, even kings consulted rishis. So the average person, of course, consulted. And it was assumed that the king had a powerful intellect. Even so, they understood the corruptive influence of power and wealth. One is bad enough, you have both, it's a killer. So to protect them from this corrosive influence, they always had a rishi, an in-house, full-time sage who would be consulted on important matters. Because there's no other go. See, if you don't have the money to start a business, what do? You borrow money. So it's the same thing, you're borrowing somebody's intellect. Okay? Any other question?
Still
Yeah.
saying,
Gandhiji believed in non-violence, but we are in the Gita, Lord Krishna says that you must act, you must fight. So, and inaction is slavery according to him. So, how do you explain the two things?
See, inaction is not an option. That was true during the independence movement, that was true during the Mahabharata war, that is true at all times. Inaction is a tamasic state.
Yes.
So that's not advisable. Now, what kind of action to take depends on the situation. So, first of all, we must understand that the Mahabharata war is an external depiction of what is happening inside us. So, you can't take it literally. But even so, assuming there was a war and Krishna advised Arjuna to fight, the situation was such that he had no other choice.
No, he had a choice of not going fighting.
Yes, and allowing unrighteousness to rule the
So
state.
the same thing, Gandhiji also, why did
No,
he
one
say-
sec. See, you asked a question, just have some patience. Listen. The question was that Gandhiji followed non-violence, and in the Mahabharata war, Krishna advocates violence, fighting. This is the question. Okay? So I'm answering that question. The answer to that is, first of all, the Mahabharata war was an external depiction of what's happening inside. Secondly, when you are left with no choice, it's like even during the independence movement or now, when there is terrorism, if you say I'm being non-violent, they'll just shoot you down. That's not an option. But during the independence movement, it was not just feelings, it was a strategy. Because the armed rebellion was not an option. If we had fought like we had been fighting since 1857, we would have lost. You were fighting one of the greatest powers, military powers in the world. Impossible. So they very intelligently, and it was not just Gandhiji, the whole group of independence leaders devised the strategy of non-violence, right? So you refuse to fight, what are they going to do? If you take up arms, they know how to deal with you. You're non-violent, they got completely disarmed. And it's not just non-violence, it was non-cooperation. He said boycott British goods. So all the mills in Manchester shut down. The entire British economy came to a halt. So this was not just a figment of the imagination. This was a carefully drawn strategy where you hit where it hurts most. And they succeeded. So similarly, during the Mahabharata war, if they had said ahimsa, Duryodhana would have walked all over them. As it is, he had walked all over them. And there was no compromise. He said, I will not give you a needle point to bury yourselves. So there was no option but to fight. We generally don't associate the Bhagavad Gita with excellence, with success, with prosperity. We believe that if you follow the Bhagavad Gita, you have to retire to the Himalayas, give up your wealth, your business, your families, and go live in a hermitage. That's not so. And on the other hand, when you want to become more successful, what do? You want to do one more course, maybe do a PhD in management, maybe join Harvard Business School, you know. Nobody thinks of the Bhagavad Gita as a resource for becoming more successful. Yet, when Mark Zuckerberg went to Steve Jobs and asked him, I want to be as successful as you, what should I do? He did not say join Harvard Business School or whatever. Do you know what he said? Go to an ashram in India. And the guy actually came to that particular ashram in India and stayed 6 months. And after he went back, he became successful. So, what is it that the Bhagavad Gita speaks of, which will bestow success, excellence, which will make you an extraordinary achiever? This is what you need to think. You know, for this, you don't need to invest money. You don't need to take a loan. To get a degree in Harvard Business School, you need to take a loan. And then you have a debt on your head for the rest of your life. But this is for free. Still you don't want it. Huh? How many people are there who come regularly to class? Very few. And we all have legitimate, so-called legitimate reasons. Huh? Oh, my daughter's just come from America. I need to spend time with her. Or my son, something else happened. Or I have to go to a party. Or there is a wedding in the family. Something or the other. If you were in Harvard Business School, would you treat that so casually? Why? Because you paid for it. I wish I could collect same amount of money. Little more. Just so that you understand the value. But I don't, not because I'm shy, but because the knowledge is so priceless that you can't put a price on it. Because it doesn't give just money, it gives you happiness. You grow into a towering personality. How can you put a value on it? So, the first thing that the Gita says is action is a must. Inaction is not an option. And And yet, nowadays, you look at people, the youngsters, they choose fields of activity depending on what is the least amount of work I can do and get the maximum returns. Right? So, what do they want to do? This answer you should have. They want to trade on the stock market. So that sitting there, you will make money on someone else's hard work. Completely tamasic attitude. It's a disgusting attitude to have, that I want to make money. You work, I will make money. That's what it is, isn't it? But the guys who really generate money, who contribute to the economy, are those who actually go out there and manufacture, they do things, they create money. And they don't care what the value of their stock is on the Bombay Stock Exchange. Someone asked Azim Premji once, during the IT boom, you know what the value of your stock is? He was all excited. Azim Premji said, I don't know. And I don't watch. I just do my work. Whatever happens, happens. That is the confidence you get when you work. So, first thing we must develop is the value for work. How many of us have that? That's why in the Indian system there was no such thing as retirement. It's a Western concept. You just kept working till you dropped dead. Yes, the nature of the work changed. Obviously, you can't be playing tennis at 80. So the nature of your job changes. But you work, continue to work. And then they told us there are 3 types of actions. One is niyatam karma, obligatory duty. That's the highest, the best quality of action, which means you just do what you ought to do, moment to moment. Fulfill your duties, your obligations, because you have received so much in life, in abundance and for free, that you owe everything to nature, to people, to the country, to God. So you're constantly working to pay back. You're not working to earn money, you're working to pay back. This is niyatam karma. Now we all know what our duties are, right? You don't need the Bhagavad Gita to tell us what your duty is. But do you think we are all performing our duties 100%? No. Why? What comes in the way? Desire. So you know what your duty is. When desire comes in the way, you drop duty and say, I will chase after desire. And that's what all of us are doing. And most of us are oblivious to the duties. So there is no thought of duty at all. Even within the family, it's all about rights. It is my right to claim from my husband, says the wife. The husband says, it is my right to claim whatever from the wife. And from the beginning, they laid down. It's actually written down that this is what I want from you. Are you willing to give? Then I'm ready to get married. So, niyatam karma is out of the window. And then when desire, what is wrong with desire is that desire prevents you from getting object of desire. Whatever it is that you want in life, you can't get because desire itself is the obstacle. Number 2, as long as the desire is unfulfilled, you will be unhappy. And number 3, it constricts you, it restricts you, you become a pale shadow of your original self because of desire. You become weak, a beggar, Every morning you go out into the world and say, please give me objects of desire. That's what we are doing. We call ourselves fancy names. Oh, I'm the CEO and the CFO and this, that, and the other. And UFO also. But at the end of the day, it is you're asking for objects of desire. And it restricts you completely. Your mind gets restricted. So break free is the message. And the most important thing is when desires get fueled to such an extent that your income is not sufficient to fulfill your desires, then what happens? You perform nishiddha karma, prohibited action, which is unethical, illegal, immoral actions. Typical example of this is Ravana. Ravana had wives. He had a harem full of damsels from heaven, not just earthly. But he wanted one more. And that one more was his undoing. So he crossed the line and went into Nishiddha Karma, coveting another man's wife. And that too, Ram's wife. How idiotic can you get? How unintelligent can you get? You abduct somebody's wife, you may get away with it. But you abduct Rama's wife, there is no way you can get away with it. So this is what we do. So these are the Rajat Guptas of the world. These are the guys who cross the line. And these are not all poor people. These are super rich people who cross the line and get into prison. What a foolish thing to do. So that is Nishiddha Karma. So, how must we live life? So there is another way of looking at the three types of actions. One is selfish. Actions driven by selfish desire, we're all very familiar with it. Where you are acting only for your personal fame and fortune. That's it. You're not even concerned about family members. Then comes unselfish. Now, what happens with selfishness is thought of self again comes in the way and it leads to mediocrity. All of us are like that. Why is there no excellence? Why is it that in a country of 1.4 billion people, we did not get even one gold medal in the Olympics? Isn't that true? Paralympics we got. Why? Because there is no thought of anything other than self. So it makes for mediocrity. Now take a look at all the people who achieved success in the world, anywhere in the world. They were not thinking of themselves. Einstein didn't do what he did for money. In fact, when he was invited to the United States the very first time, they asked him, what is it that you want? Apparently, he knew physics, but he didn't understand money. So he gave a figure that was so low that the university unilaterally increased his remuneration and said, you can't live on what you have asked for. Amazing. To his starting, the first 2 minutes, and you're transported to a different world. You think of Shehnai, you can't think of anybody other than Bismillah Khan. Don Bradman did not play cricket for money. What a man. So this is it. You want to achieve excellence, you've got to think beyond yourself. You cannot achieve excellence with a small mind. So there are people who have worked tirelessly to benefit the poor. There are people, there's a gentleman I met in the United States who just provides solar lamps to villages in Rajasthan, in other countries, other states, sorry. He just does it. Why? Because he feels for them. How would you like to be in pitch darkness every day? No light. And sunlight, though we have, we're blessed with sunlight. So he just gave them solar lamps. And when he went back again after 6 months, there were people falling at his feet for changing the very fabric of their lives. Then there are people who work for the environment. There's a lawyer here who cleaned up Warsaw Beach. You should see pictures of what it was like before, and now it looks like a different beach altogether. And then there is selfless. Selfless means actions driven by no desire. Now you might wonder, what is this no desire? If you don't have a desire, there is no action. Where there is action, there's got to be desire. So, a selfless action is where you have the vision of the transcendental. You're not interested in anything in the world, you want the beyond. And because that desire is for beyond the world, and that desire is so strong that all other desires vanish. So you have no desire for anything in the world. Therefore, it's called desireless action, selfless action. This is real power. Anyone who has this desire, genuinely from the bottom of your heart, you have zero value for anything that the world has to offer. You're in a different plane altogether. So there's power there. That is niyatam karma. So what kind of actions will you do? Whatever you're supposed to do, you do. Whatever is your obligation, you do. But you have no interest. You're not worried about anything. So, when you have no desire, there's no action. So you're a lazy person, you're a waster. There is no motivation. This is not what we're talking about. The majority of human beings function with desire. So when you have desire, there is flawed action. Because the mind is agitated, stressed, it's a state of rajas, and it leads to costly errors, mistakes. What we are speaking of, what the Gita is speaking of, is transcending desire, picking up a higher desire. Then perfect action, because the mind is calm, the intellect is sharp, clear, actions brilliant. Like a tennis player at match point, a badminton player on the verge of winning the match point. It's amazing how you have to just concentrate on the ball, on the shuttle. Your mind can't afford to flicker even slightly. You can't think of, will I get it, won't I get it? You're gone. So that concentration is possible only when the mind is completely at peace, which we don't experience. We don't even know what it is. We don't know that our minds are agitated to begin with. So how can you get there? And this is possible only when you have a higher desire, when your entire personality is dedicated to something, anything beyond you. Sarvasva, sarva bhavena. Oh, what words there. Sarvasva means your entire being. Sarva bhavena, same thing. With your whole being, you want it. And that intensity of thought is like burning. It gets you what you want. You achieve the impossible. Now, you chase after a desire, you will lose it. You run after a desire, the object runs away from you. Turn your back on it. Let go of the desire. The object comes to you. So, how to let go is the question. We say let go of the desire. Question is how to let go. Pick up a higher desire. Because the fact is that nobody can give up a desire. No one can and no one has given up a desire. But you yourself have experienced this. And so all you have to do is go back to your own life. As a child, you had millions of desires for toys, isn't it? Huh? It's so interesting. You see a child go past a toy shop and he stays there. She can't move because the desire for the toy is so strong. In London once in Hamleys, there's 3 or 4 stories. And every floor, the mother had told the child, the little girl, you can buy only one item from each floor. So she says, okay. And then she goes to the first floor and finds obviously more than one item that she wants. And then she goes to the second floor. Mother says, you go see all and then decide what you want. After she goes to the top floor, she asks the mother, but mom, can I buy just one more from each floor? That's what a child is. And that's what the desires are. But the same child, when she grows up, like you now, you can go to Hamleys up and down all those floors. Your internal needle will not move even slightly, not even by 1 degree. Isn't it? You have zero desires for toys. But what you have to question is, did you at any stage in your life decide to give up desires for toys? No. Now how do they go? If you understand that, you will understand what to do now. See, don't just give pat answers because I said higher desire, you're saying higher desire. How did your desires for toys go? Maybe on your birthday, your parents gifted you the bicycle. You remember all of us had bicycles. And the thrill of learning how to balance yourself on that bicycle was so great. We fell down, we hurt ourselves, we fell off the bike, but we did not let go because our attention was entirely on the bicycle. First you got it with wheels, 2 wheels, and then the wheels were knocked out. But that, when you got, desires for toys went away. Because the bicycle gave you far more pleasure than any toy. And then you grew up, you became a teenager, and you had a crush on someone. Then what happened? Even the bicycle went. So this is how you moved from stage to stage, picking up a higher desire. Now you understand what a higher desire is. What is a higher desire? Huh? Arey yaar. Just now I said it, now you are not able to answer. What is a higher desire? Who said that? I thought it was you. I was going to give you a whack. No. What is a higher desire?
Understand yourself.
Your intellect thinks about how.
What is a higher desire? A bicycle is a higher desire compared to toys. So how does it become a higher desire?
Something more action,
Hmm?
something more fulfilling.
Correct. Something that gives you more joy. Simple. That is a higher desire. After that, I said you had a crush, you fell in love. At least then you should understand. Nah. So when you fall in love, what is that joy compared to a bicycle? You easily give up the bicycle. You don't give up the bicycle. Bicycle gives you up. So that is a higher desire. Now, come back to us. We are all obsessed with physical things. No? I want a designer handbag. I want clothes. I want what? A more luxurious car, a bigger car. I want. Then you have one car, you want two cars. Like a gentleman in Delhi. He had he had a fleet of luxury cars. Mercedes, BMW, this, that, Rolls Royce. And then he goes and buys a Maruti 800 in those days. So his family members started laughing at him. His children saying, Dad, you're actually going to ride in that? He said, yes. And he had a very good reason for that. He says, I have to go and meet with people in the government. If I go in a BMW, they'll say, "Arey, ye to Amir aadmi hai." And they'll ask for more from him. But if I go in a Maruti 800, they'll think, "Arey, ye to apna aadmi hai." So that's the thing. Whatever it is, you want more and more and more. But this more and more at the physical material level vanishes when you pick up an emotional desire, when you go to the emotional level. You have love, not necessarily for a human being, but you love your vocation. Like, let's say you're a musician, you just love music. You are a dancer, you love dance, like Malvika Sarukai, what a way she dances. She just transports you to a different world. And that can be done only when you love what you're doing. Nadal loves tennis. You can love your family members, you can love your community, you can love your country. Right? Love. That's a very powerful higher desire, which then everything fades into insignificance. Physical things don't matter. Then you go one step higher to the intellectual level. In the United States, in Chicago once, there was a couple that invited us to dinner. And he, I didn't realize, was on the verge of getting the Nobel Prize in chemistry. He had done something. So when we went there, he wasn't there, only the wife was there. And she said, let's have dinner because there is no guarantee that he'll come. And true to that, we had dinner, we had just finished when the husband came and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot that I'd invited you to dinner." Because he was on the verge of a Nobel Prize, how is he going to remember dinner? And not just that, he came and he saw plates in which people had eaten. So he said, "Oh, I'm so silly, I forgot that I had already eaten." He even forgot that he was hungry. That level of absorption in the higher, in an intellectual concept, so much so that you forget your own physical needs and your emotion. He forgot that the wife told that he forgets their anniversary regularly. Then, when you're bitten by the spiritual bug, everything else seems so childish, seems so meaningless, because it's all impermanent. and it's just not worth seeking, running after. When you taste the joy of spiritual bliss, I'm not talking about realization, but just the joy of. That's why I keep asking you to study the Bhagavad Gita. First thing in the morning, you read these concepts or listen to them or watch, and something connects with you, and it's as if the penny is dropped, and to that extent you move up that little bit, you feel liberated. It's incomparable. You can't compare it with your eating chocolate cake or even emotional or intellectual joys. It's a different thing altogether. So that movement, that's why we say you need to give yourself a chance and let go of desire. How? Pick up a higher desire. Now, when you think of picking up a higher desire, you must focus on identifying your swadharma. Swadharma, your core talent, your passion, the gift that you were born with. All of us are particularly talented in a given field. Like some people take to music, other people to sport, some others the field of medicine or engineering, whatever, or cooking maybe. They become chefs. So you have to identify your swadharma. It's not just we choose fields based on where will I make money. You know, I met a doctor yesterday, very senior, and the person who introduced him to me, this was at a talk at the Willingdon Club, said he's a musician. And I said, oh. Then he said, actually she's wrong. I'm a doctor by profession, but musician by interest. So he said, if I had followed Vedanta and Swadharma, I would have chosen music and not become a doctor. So many of us make mistakes because we don't consider a vocation in which we can't make money, or at least you think you can't make money. And then in that field, look beyond yourself. Because thought of self is what leads to boredom. To the extent you're bored in life, it's because you've been thinking of yourself. Just selfish obsession. Leads to isolation, a myopic vision, stress, and in the end, failure. So, inspiration. Inspiration is what is missing in life. Move to a powerful emotional motivation, like a parent has with a child. A parent who's really motivated will do anything for the children. Then intellectual. When a gentleman called Dr. Sridharan was from the railways, he was in the Indian Railways, was asked to head Delhi Metro. It was an impossible situation. So he went to the powers that be and said, I will take it provided, number one, there is no political interference, which is impossible in Delhi. And nobody will tell me to appoint a particular contractor. And I'm given a free hand. So they said yes. And he's called the Metro Man. What a thing he established. First time in India, Delhi Metro. Then it was fantastic. After he retired, I don't know what the condition is. But that's that intellectual dedication. And then the spiritual. So, once you get that spiritual bug, You have the, yeah, just listen to this. So all she says is, this is Mirabai's composition. Mharo Pranam means my salutation to you. Because you understand the grandeur of the world. I don't know whether you've actually observed. You have to give yourself that time and the mindset to observe. Like this morning, there was a parrot that came and sat on the windowsill. Just opened the window, and a few minutes later, the parrot came and sat. It was a bright green color, as if it had just had a shower and been to the beauty parlor and come out. And what a sweet sound it made. And loud voice the parrots have. Little thing like this. And I said, in this concrete jungle, where does the parrot come from? And it's not just the parrot, there are amazing birds that you see. Anywhere in Mumbai, I guess. The sunrise. It's such a beautiful thing. Within minutes, seconds, the whole complexion changes. At one moment, the sun is so gentle, and then this blazing heat and light. What a creation. Who created it? Mharo Pranam. And when you get into that mindset, your mind is calm. So that is the higher ideal. When you have a higher ideal, you think of something beyond yourself, you tap into your potential. Then the ordinary Atma that you are becomes a Mahatma. And you have it in you. See, that's the thing. You must have that belief in yourself. The conviction that I am Atman. And all I have to do is remove the rubbish that I have added to it. So all your job is a cleansing job. Cleanse your personality of all the stupidity that you've acquired and you'll be fine. Then you become creative. So there was this Bhasmasura who, because of extreme tapas, had got a boon that whatever he touched will turn into ash. And then he went around the whole world turning everything to ash. And there was panic in the world. So they went and appealed to Lord Vishnu and said, please, you're the only one who can help us. Why is it that nobody else thought of it? Why is it that only Vishnu had to think? So Vishnu said, okay, I'll help you. He came on earth and he changed into a lady. Mohini is her name. And beautiful lady, and went and danced before Bhasmasura. So you see, what it is you have to identify the other person's weakness and hit there. So Bhasmasura was so powerful, couldn't be tackled by anybody except his own weakness. So Mohini started dancing and he got so enthralled by it that whatever she said, he would do. And she said, okay, come dance with me. Just whatever actions I perform, you perform the same action. He said, okay. And both of them were dancing. Then finally, Mohini put her own hand on her head. And he didn't realize what was happening. He did that, and instantly he was turned to ash. So, why am I telling this story? Why is it that only Vishnu became creative? Because you see, that's the thing. It was so simple. Why didn't anybody else think of it? So, the greatest of human beings are those who are creative. Find easy solutions to problems. And then you transform, like Hanuman transformed from a monkey to a god. Imagine today, people don't just worship Ram, they worship Hanuman. They recite Hanuman Chalisa. And how he transformed, because the moment he met Ram, he lost his monkey nature. Because the mind is like that, chanchala, asthira. Asthira is constantly moving from place to place. And even at one point, is chanchala, oscillates. That monkey of a mind became steady the moment he met Ram. After that, he didn't think of anybody other than Ram or anything other than Ram. And it is that single pointedness that gave him that power. Amazing power. And that's how he played a stellar role in the Ramayana. So can we. All you have to do is have that one-pointed, single-pointed pursuit in life, which is self-improvement. Never mind what other people are doing. Never mind what they're saying. Never mind whether they're sarcastic or evil or, like Arjuna here in the first chapter is worried about what others are doing. What does it matter? The moment you think of what others are doing, you become weak. Because you're not doing what you should be doing. Leave them alone. Everybody functions according to their nature. You have to deal with them. Among South Indians, there is a peculiar habit they have. Anything happens, haven't you noticed? You know what it signifies? Chhod do yaar. It doesn't matter. Seriously. See, actually, it means several things. You say something outstanding, they appreciate it. You say something absolutely stupid, the sound is the same. It means different things. So, like that, when you're objective, you just say, somebody comes and says, you know what he did? He divorced his wife. You know what she said about you? That you're evil. That's the attitude you should have. What difference does it make? And then life is fun. It's like having an in-house soap opera going on constantly. So that's the thing. Chapter 3, verse 19 says, when you understand all of this, how will you act?
सघोषोधार्तराष्ट्राणां हृदयानि व्यदारयत् नभश्च पृथिवीं चैव तुमुलो व्यनुनादयन्.
Brilliant verse. Tasmat, therefore, asakta satatam, karyam karma samachara. Therefore, always perform obligatory actions without attachment. One who acts without attachment attains the supreme. Oh, what classic verse. You learn it if you're serious about self-improvement. Learn this by heart and remind yourself every day. Tasmat, therefore, asakta, without attachment. Satatam, always. Do what? Karyam karma. Perform your obligations. one who acts without attachment attains the supreme. So the first thing is, whatever you do in life, in the world, don't be attached to it. How not to get attached? Again, you can't detach yourself from anything. You can only attach yourself to something higher. Higher means what? Atman. Why? Because you must understand everything in the world passes. It's temporary, impermanent, not worth running after or having. It has come to you, savor it as long as it's there. When it goes, say goodbye, finished, that's it. But act wholeheartedly. This is the difficulty, If you act in a slipshod manner and without attachment, you're a tamasic person. If you act wholeheartedly with attachment, you're a rajasic person. Act as if your life depends on it, knowing fully well it doesn't matter. That is sattva. That is chapter 3, verse 19. You live that, oh, you become a beauty of a person. Irrespective of what your externals are, inner beauty you attain. And do not depend on the fruit. Why? Fruit is beyond your control. Find fulfillment in the action. Then you will be happy irrespective of the result. You don't even get a bronze medal, but you've done your best. You will come back celebrating. Otherwise, you get a silver, you still come back crying. No? And then your desires for the world drop. So, now we'll continue with verse 19.
सघोषोधार्तराष्ट्राणां हृदयानि व्यदारयत् नभश्च पृथिवीं चैव तुमुलो व्यनुनादयन्.
That terrible noise echoing through the earth and sky pierced the hearts of Dhritarashtra's party. What is this noise? Everyone conscious. So, although there is external noise, there is a different response, an almost opposite response in both the camps. Kauravas afraid, Pandavas inspired. So, this is the difference, The world will be what it is. There will be COVID, it will come and go. There will be other challenges will come and go. The economy may go up, it may go down. The stock market may go up, it may go down. All these changes take place. This is part and parcel of life. But how you face it, there's a world war, God forbid. Terrible noise. Now noise is coming. Correct time we are taking the verse. How do you view that noise? If you're an evil person, that external noise will trouble your conscience, or your conscience will trouble you, and you're afraid. But if you're a good person, like the Pandavas were, external noise also inspires you. Because they're warriors. The sound of the conscience inspires them. Now we move to verse 20 and half of 21.
अथ व्यवस्थितान् दृष्ट्वा धार्तराष्ट्रान् कपिध्वजः प्रवृत्ते शस्त्रसम्पाते धनुरुद्यम्य पाण्डवः ऋषिकेशं तदा वाक्यम् इदमाह महीपते.
Then, O Lord of the senses, Pandava, Arjuna, with the monkey flag, seeing Dhritarashtra's party marshalled with weapons about to be discharged, raised his bow and spoke to Rishikesha, killer of Keshi. So, with this verse, or this 1.5 verses, we begin the next topic, Arjuna ready for battle, 20 to 25. So, you can see here Arjuna is all set for the battle. He has planned for it for 13 long years, and they've strategized, they know what they're doing. But a few verses later, he collapses. This is the mind. Right now, he's clear about his obligation. He's fully alert, and this is the time to execute. But suddenly, there's confusion. So, at any time, see, the message here is your intellect must be alert at all times, because you never know when the mind will take over and create confusion. Watch out for this deadly mind. And we are so careless. First of all, our intellect is not strong, and it doesn't seem to bother us. But when this happens, see, fortunately for Arjuna, and that is his good karma or good choice that he made, Krishna was right there with his advice. Otherwise, they would have been devastated. So, the message here is consult your existing intellect, use it, and strengthen it. So, whatever you do, some part of your daily routine must be invested in strengthening that intellect, because you never know when you'll fall. See, fall does mean you suddenly get distracted, go off at a tangent. And you don't even know it, you justify it, you think you're doing the right thing. Like a lady told me the other day, I've joined crochet classes. I said, what? I mean, not that there's anything wrong with crochet, but her vocation is different, her profession is different, she has never shown any interest in any of this. And suddenly she says, and that too, I'm learning crochet. It's all very well to start it. Start anything as a hobby, but that can't take over your life. And until then, until the time that you strengthen your intellect, consult a person with a strong intellect. At least someone who's clearer than you. Where to find? If you have a strong desire for it, the universe will supply. Right? Number one. Number two, even if you have a clear thinker in your surrounding, you have to be able to recognize that person, right? How will you recognize? You've got to be clear yourself to some extent. At least that much discrimination you must have to distinguish between a non-thinker and a thinker. So, Dhritarashtra represents the mind. And the interesting thing about the mind is that whatever be the quality of your mind, whatever be the quality of your thoughts, so will be your world. So, in other words, the world is a projection of your mind. We don't live in the same world, we all live in different worlds. So, you must understand that. And the world that you have projected, if you don't like, you can't directly go there and change the world. What must you do? Change your thoughts. And your world miraculously changes. It is amazing how it happens. But it happens, and you must try it out. Experiment with it. Change your thoughts. See, we're so full of negativity that you project that negativity. Duryodhana was negative. He saw negativity in the Pandavas. They were God's good men. They were his brothers who, in spite of all the evil that he had done, they supported him. They saved his life. Yudhishthir saved his life several times. He didn't see it. And then you get the world that you get into a criminal world. If you have such negative thoughts, this is deadly. So a doctor's mind projects a medical world. Have you seen doctors? They hang out with doctors, they read medical things, they think medical things, their conversation is different. A business person projects a business world. And then he first thing in the morning, I went on Marine Drive and used to go for a walk in the mornings. First thing in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, people are talking about stocks and shares. Huh? That is their world. A good mind projects a good world. An evil mind projects an evil world. A suspicious mind projects a suspicious world. That's what it is. All are lords of the earth. That's why he calls them lords of earth. That is what Dhritarashtra was.
How to deal with negative emotions?
Yours or others? Self. Okay, the question is, how do you deal with your own negative emotions? See, first of all, when you're thinking negatively of another person or a situation or whatever it is, you must understand that a person, that is his nature. So you need to make an assessment of his nature and understand that he is not going to change. Person will not change. Why? Vasana, I mean, you're born like that, you were brought up like that, and that is who you are. It's like the typical thing, it says the tiger can't change his stripes. Similarly, your dog can't stop barking. That's the nature of the dog. The nature of a cobra is that it will spew poison on you. So that's the nature. Now then you have to figure out, how am I going to deal with the individual? You, just because he is like a cobra doesn't mean he stings you. Don't allow him to sting you. Keep a safe distance. You know, there's a story of a man who used to go into villages and save leopards from drowning. So many villages have open wells. You know what I mean? Without walls. So human beings know that there is a well. The poor leopard doesn't know that. So it's running at high speed, falls into the well and drowns, dies. So this man made it his mission to save leopards from drowning. Now you can't go to the leopard and say, hold my hand, I'll save you. You know what he does? He first anesthetizes the leopard, pulls the leopard out of the well, and before the leopard can regain consciousness, gets the hell out of it. So you have to keep a safe distance between you and leopard-like people. There are people like that. Or ordinary people, your family members, sometimes get into a bad mood. Keep your distance. You start snapping at you, you understand, it's a dog-like creature. Or barks at you. So, in short, you must be objective and not get involved. And if somebody says something, don't allow it to affect you. Just understand that's the nature of the person. Then you have no problems. Have fun, he said. Yeah. Same thing applies to brothers-in-law. Na?
I'm having fun over it.
Okay. Next, 21, half of 21 and 22.
अर्जुन उवाच सेनयोरुभयोर्मध्ये रथं स्थापयमेच्युत यावदेतान्निरीक्षेऽहं योद्धुकामानवस्थितान् कैर्मया सह योद्धव्यम् अस्मिन् रणसमुद्यमे.
Now Arjuna asks, and the entire Bhagavad Gita is a question and answer session between Arjuna and Krishna. And this is very important in communication. It must be a two-way communication, can't be just one way. You can't be giving lectures to people, it's got to be a dialogue. So he says, O Achyuta, infallible one who has never fallen, put my chariot between the two armies so I can see those warmongers standing, whom I must fight in the ensuing battle. So, Krishna is referred to as Rishikesha, Lord of the senses, and Achyuta, one who is never vanquished. Now, again, you see Arjuna totally ready for battle. When the mind distances itself from the intellect, you become inefficient. When there is a gap between the mind and the intellect, the mind is going one way, intellect is going another way. You come to a standstill, you don't know what to do. Now, this is what has happened, is going to happen to Arjuna. Fortunately for him, Krishna was there to revive his intellect. Now, to the extent, in Arjuna's case, the destruction was complete of the mind. With us, it's partial. So you don't see it. You're partially handicapped. Because the mind is playing up to that extent, intellect is handicapped. Now the Bhagavad Gita was given out between the two armies, means between punya and apunya, between good and bad. We tend to follow mechanical lives. Why are you doing what you're doing? Because my mother did it, grandmother did it, I'm also doing it. You don't think, or my friends are doing it, so I'm doing it. But when you stand between the two, means you take an objective view of things, you become objective, then you see the kurus. Kurus? Evil. Within you, you start seeing that, oh, I'm selfish, I'm egoistic, I tend to get angry, I snap at people, whatever. I'm disorganized, I'm forgetful. No? Until then, you think you're an angel and everybody else is bad. So the mission is to get to that state. Senayor Rubhayor Madhye, between the two armies you should stand, between your own good qualities and your bad qualities. So, objectivity, non-involvement in anything. Here we are so bad that not only do we get involved with our own stuff, we get involved in others. So it's very interesting to see, suppose that two cars just touch each other on the road. Then what happens? In the middle of the road, both the drivers get off and start fighting. It doesn't end there. If it continues for a while, 25 people gather there. And these 25 people are taking sides and experiment with it. Go ask a guy on the periphery, kya hua bhai? I don't know, but I'm on this side. So you take sides. You don't even know those guys. So that is really bad. Between the two armies means between punya and apunya. Next, 23.
योत्स्यमानानवेक्षेऽहं य एतेऽत्र समागताः धार्तराष्ट्रस्य दुर्बुद्धेः युद्धे प्रियचिकीर्षवः.
I discern those wanting to oblige the wicked son of Dhritarashtra who have gathered here to fight. See, Arjuna is smarting from Duryodhana's evil. He has done so much to belittle the Pandavas, do harm to the Pandavas, So he's He's a human being after all, he's not a realized soul. So all that is playing in his mind. Therefore, he's being judgmental. He says, show me the Kurus, all those who have gathered here to please the son of Dhritarashtra. Now, what is wrong with this is he is being judgmental of others. To the extent your attention is on others, you're not looking at yourself. And so your faults you don't see and you don't correct. Our mission in life is to correct ourselves. No? What connection do you have with anybody else? And that too another people in the opposite side that you're fighting, warriors. Soon either you'll be dead or the other guy will be dead. So the connection itself is very dicey. And then you go off at a tangent to what others should be doing or others should not be doing. And you're so eloquent in telling people, you should do this and you should do that. Hare, what are you doing? What should I do now? What is the course of action I should take? How should I face my obstacle, my battles? He's left all that and he's worried about the opposite camp. See, the extroverted people get lost. They get entangled in the world. They meander into all kinds of unnecessary things and perish. The inward-looking people stay focused on their improvement and achieve great heights. That's the thing. You know, you take a look at people and you find that the Sant Tukaram had a wife who was always complaining about him. You're a bad husband, you can't even provide for the family. Oh, which Vithoba are you worshipping? Your God is horrible, he can't even take care of. You know, constantly. All the time she was complaining about him. And he accepted. He says, yes, I am a bad husband. It's true that I haven't been able to take care of you. And on the verge of realization, even at that time, he goes to the wife and says, you've been such a good wife. You've taken care of me so well. I'm going to Vaikunta, to heaven. Come with me, we'll both go together. You know what she says? She's not even worried about her children. She says, who'll look after the cow? So I'm not coming. He understood his obligation is over and he moved on. But this is it. Those who complain, those who are negative in their attitude, they remain where they are. So, you want to be different? Let go. Don't worry about what others are doing, except to the extent of how should I deal with them. That's all. Don't judge people, because that's not your business.